Have you ever found yourself wondering why popular music is called pop? Of course not, it's obvious, but today we're going to look at the history of 6 genre names that are significantly more interesting than the etymology of pop. Hope you enjoy, let's dive in. While the term rock and roll has come to encompass a wide variety of music, the name was first used to describe a specific sound by the DJ Alan Freed in the 50s. Prior to that, the phrase rock and roll had been used as a not so subtle sexual innuendo in countless blues songs. The first known example being a recording done in 1922 by Trixie Smith called "My Man Rocks Me with One Steady Roll."
My man rocks me with one steady roll.
Over the next while, the term rockin' would become closely tied into the concept of rhythm or musical beat. This can be seen in the titles of such songs as Rockin' in Rhythm by Duke Ellington, Rocket for Me by Ella Fitzgerald, as well as many others. Fast forward to the 50s, and African-American R&B records are being snatched up by white teenagers across the US. The Cleveland-based DJ Alan Freed was among the first white guys to broadcast these so-called race records across the airwaves. He would go on to refer to this music as, you guessed it, rock and roll. Alright, next let's look at jazz. To quote the Ken Burns documentary, jazz grew up in a million places, but it was born in New Orleans. One of the largest cultural melting pots in the 1800s, New Orleans was a port city home to many different ethnicities, as well as a major center for the African-American slave trade. The mixing of all these cultures would lay the ground for the music we now know as jazz. Finding the exact roots of the term jazz is made especially tricky because, like rock and roll, it most likely comes from a slang term. How exactly this term became intertwined with the music of those pioneers is uncertain and a subject of much debate. During the 1860s, the word jasm meant spirit or energy, a term that fairly accurately describes the music. There's also a theory that suggests the name jazz is derived from a more sexual slang word that sounds similar. I'll let you figure it out for yourself. I want this channel to stay monetized, thank you very much. A theory that I particularly enjoy is that a certain jasmine perfume was often worn by the prostitutes at the brothels that these New Orleans jazz musicians would work at. This scent would become closely identified with the music, jasmine being shortened to jazz. Whatever it was, the name jazz would come to refer to this type of music. The group, the original Dixieland Jazz Band, would be the first to record this sound and the first to build a fan base around it. The name jazz would transcend the group and would eventually be modified to jazz. Moving on, I said hip, hop. Hippie to the hippie to hip, hip the hop, you don't stop. Yeah, I'm probably gonna stick to guitar. Of course, this is the opening line to the 1979 song Rapper's Delight by the Sugar Hill Gang. It's also the song that's commonly said to have put hip-hop on the map. So what's up with this name? Well, both the words hip and hop have a storied place in the African-American vernacular. Hip was often used by jazz musicians as a synonym for cool or with it. Like mostly everything we've talked about today, there's a fair bit of debate as to where this word actually originated. It's been suggested that referring to something cool as hip and as someone hip as a cat comes from the West African word hepicat, meaning one with eyes open. The word hop was tied into music through dance, a hop being a skip or a little jump used to move to the rhythms of jazz music. For example, the Lindy Hop was a specific dance that evolved in Harlem in the 20s alongside swing music. You can see how these two words are already closely related. To see them begin to represent a type of music, we need to look to the South Bronx in the 70s. A type of cultural movement was going on, and with it, a music developing. DJs would create tracks using the rhythmic and instrumental breaks of disco and R&B records. Over top, an MC would hype up a crowd using toasts, call and responses, and unique rhymes. One particular evening saw rapper Keith Cowboy and MC Lovebug Starsky on stage together. A friend of theirs in attendance was getting ready to head off to the military, so the duo, mimicking a drill sergeant, went, "I say hip, you say hop. Hip, hop. Hip." The crowd went wild, and before long the term hip-hop was permeating throughout the culture, eventually becoming the name for the genre as a whole. Next we've got heavy metal, a term that was used numerous times in pop culture before it would become associated with any musical genre. The word heavy was used by beatniks and hipsters to refer to something cool, deep, or real. It was used in chemistry to literally describe a dense, heavy metal element. Author William S. Burroughs used the term on multiple occasions in fictional books he wrote in the 60s. And perhaps the most famous case was the line in the Steppenwolf song Born to Be Wild.
heavy metal thunder,
referring to the sound a motorcycle would make as it tore down the highway. But Geezer Butler would claim that his band Black Sabbath was the first to have their sound referred to as heavy metal by a critic who was not such a big fan. Apparently they received a rather scathing review saying something along the lines of, "This isn't rock music, this is the sound of heavy metal crashing." Their fans got wind of this and the name was quickly adopted into the musical lexicon, referring to the genre as a whole. Of course, this being the internet, we can't look at metal without looking at the subgenre Gent. Now, this was a little bit trickier to research because unlike the other names that we've looked at, Gent is a fairly new genre with much less research done into the etymology. But from what I can tell, Gent is an onomatopoeia for the guitar chugging sounds commonly associated with the genre. Gent, 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 gent. It seems that people claim that this term began popping up years ago in Meshuggah message boards. Since then, periphery guitarist Misha Mansour would use the term to refer to the sound that he was looking for in his guitar pickups. Before long, the term was used to describe a type of music. Though I have read some long-winded internet comments about how Gent isn't a subgenre of metal at all. That's a topic for another time. That's all for today, my friends. I want to remind you guys that I don't consider myself a musical historian so much as a fan of musical history. This is by no means a thorough study. I fairly quickly glanced over some fairly deep topics. I'd encourage you to check out these things on your own if you're interested. Thank you all so much for watching. As you may know, there's a bit of unrest going on around YouTube AdSense. To help ensure a future for my channel and content like this, please consider heading over to my Patreon page. These videos are made possible by the support of my patrons, so a very special thank you to all of them. I'm Samurai Guitarist, and I'll see you again soon.